All right, we're doing a series on Proverbs and wisdoms from the book of Proverbs. Today we're talking about friends and enemies. Because here's the facts. Your friends shape you. Who it is you hang out with, who it is you talk to, who it is you pray with, who it is you party with, all of those things shape you. But just as importantly, your enemies can define you. Who is it that's not comfortable with you? Why would somebody not like you or approve of you? That's a good time to do a little soul searching, right? Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times. All right, now let's get that one again, all right? Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times. How many is all? Every single second. A friend loves at all times. And the rest of the verse says, and a brother is born for adversity. What that means is, these people that love you, that are friends, their perfect time of loving you is when you are in adverse situations. You see, isn't it easy to love somebody when they're being good? Isn't it easy to love somebody when they're in adverse situations they didn't ask for? Man, it's easy to love somebody that got T-boned in a car accident. It's easy to visit and love on your friend when they have gotten some illness. A little harder when they bring things on themselves. A little bit tougher when they go through a divorce they asked for. A little bit tougher when they have an addiction that they don't seem to be working on. But I want to ask you this as Christians. How many times in your life have you said, I am going to love you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. There's no way you can run me off. There's no way you can knock me down. I'm going to love you when you're unlovable because that is my decision, not your control. Have you ever done that? It's a powerful choice you make in your life that says, I'm going to wake up every day and love somebody, and if you're my friend, there's absolutely nothing you can do to make me not love you. I ain't going away. And I encourage us all today, make those decisions. Proverbs 27, verse 17, you know this one. Iron sharpens iron. Just like iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. Now, in order to get that iron to sharpen iron, you've either got to rub it really hard or whack it really hard. You've got to work on it. That's painful. But see, our friends make us better. Our friends are folks that we got to give them the right to sometimes hurt us. We got to give them the right to be truthful with us. Truth hurts sometimes, doesn't it? Yes. Iron sharpens iron. What we're intended to do with our friendships is help each other grow. You see, we ought to be able to call brothers and sisters in Christ and say, I'm struggling with something today, and offer them no judgment whatsoever, no matter how silly or ridiculous it might sound to us, how uninformed or lack of wisdom. That we're going to work on it because iron sharpens iron. And just like I'm going to help them in that moment, I'm going to have one of those moments too, a moment when I lack clarity. And by coming together with my friend, I can grow. That's what Christians do. That's why it's so important to be here. Folks, we're not here to check a box every Sunday morning. God doesn't care about boxes. We are here every Sunday morning to praise God and build each other up. To beat on each other a little bit sometimes. Sometimes to love on each other, sometimes to talk to each other, pray about each other, to handle and make each other better. It's like Jonathan and David in the Bible. You know, David whips Goliath, and then he starts a rivalry, not on his intent, but a rivalry with King Saul. But right after that story, if you read real careful, it says, oh, Jonathan chose to love David. And they became best heartfelt friends. And Jonathan, as he makes that decision, gives him his coat, his tunic, his belt, his sword, and his bow. What that means is, I'm giving you everything I have of value as a king's son, and I am forming a covenant with you that I will be your best friend. And boy, Jonathan kept that covenant. There'd be times when Saul was plotting, his daddy was plotting to kill David, and he'd give David a warning. There'd be times when he'd give him signs and say, yep, Daddy's coming after you. And he stuck with him through thick and thin, all the way to his death, which David mourned. But after everything settled down and David was still alive and he's king of Israel, he went and found Jonathan's boy, Mephibosheth, who was lame. and he took him into his castle, into his palace, and he said, I'm going to give you all the land your granddaddy had. Everything Saul owned, I'm going to give it to you. And then this little verse says, and Mephibosheth ate at the table of David frequently. That's what friends do. I don't just take care of you, I take care of your family. And when you're gone, I'll take care of your kids, because that's what we had together. And a lot of us are in that situation right now, aren't we? Taking care of extended family and the next generation sometimes. That same passage, chapter 27 of Proverbs, says this, curious little verse. It says, incense and perfume bring joy to the heart. Now see, you thought incense was for hippies? All right, well the proverb writer was a hippie. Incense and perfume bring joy to the heart. Now that's true for a lot of us. Melissa and I went and ate at Papado one time, a long time ago, and we were going to our table, and it was a date night, so she had on a little bit of perfume. She didn't wear strong perfume, but she had a little perfume on, and we sat down. And this lady at the table next to us said, y'all got to move. Your perfume is way too strong. There's moments that test my Christianity. And I really wanted to say, yo, heifer, you can move just as well as we can. But see, we all have it in us. But I didn't. I just said, all right, let's move. Let's go somewhere else. Perfume was not a joy to her. Now, the reason I'm telling you that story is this. The Proverbs, folks, are wisdom statements. They're not statements to say this is locked down, it's always true, there's never any exceptions. That's not what wisdom is for. But his point is, incense and perfume bring joy to the heart. But the beauty of a friend is the heartfelt advice that comes from their heart. That's what we get from friends, advice. A different perspective, a different way of looking at things. That's why older folks need to bond with younger folks, because you've got a perspective that only comes with years. And they need to hear that. And it's beautiful when that heartfelt advice comes out, and it's just as comforting as perfume and incense if you like it. I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis was a jazz entertainer. He was a piano player. He was good, really good. Many years ago now, he was playing in a jazz bar, I guess, and a fella came up to him afterwards. Now, Daryl's a black man. The fella that came up is a white man. He said, man, that was good. I didn't know that there were any black people playing Jerry Lee Lewis music. And so Daryl looked at him a little bit and said, have you ever heard of Fats Domino and folks like that? Nope. He said, Jerry Lee Lewis learned that style of music from going to black honky-tonks and stuff. He said, no, he didn't. Jerry Lee Lewis invented it. Okay. Well, he asked the guy if he wanted to talk a while, and they got to spending time together, and the fellow said, you know, you're the only black man I've ever had a drink with. And they continued to talk. One day, one of this white guy's friends said, you got to tell him. And that guy confessed that he was a member of the KKK. But they kept talking, and Daryl didn't go away. And one day, the fellow said, well, one of my problems with black people is y'all have a violent gene in you that comes out, and that's why y'all are violent. And the fellow looked at him and said, can you name me one black mass murderer? Serial killer? The guy stumbled and he said, well, that's because all white people have a gene that makes them serial killers. Yours is just latent and hadn't come out yet. And through time, this fella gave Daryl his white gown and hood. And in Daryl's life, get this, a black man meeting with KKK members, he has collected 200 robes because he was willing to reach out. In World War II, a guy named Ellis and a guy named Fritz, Ellis from Great Britain, Fritz from Germany. They met in a war camp, POW camp. Fritz, the German officer, had been caught. And they met in this camp, and of course they hated each other because that was the natural state of being an enemy. But through time, they started playing chess together. And as they began to play chess together and started to talk together, they began to realize we actually probably have more in common than we do apart. And you know what? You're not what I thought. And they formed a friendship that would last way after World War II. And here's what I'm saying to you folks. Friendship requires that we reach to somebody else before we judge them. If we want to be a friend to people, we got to reach out to them. When I was in preacher boy school, and I was a pretty hard-shell kind of fellow back then too, but there was a class I was always uncomfortable with, and the class was called Denominational Doctrines. And we had a book that told us what everybody thought. This is what Baptists believe, this is what Methodists believe, and I memorized those books because I can, so I memorized them. But it really disillusioned me when I went out and found out the book was wrong. I'd go talk to a Baptist and I'd say, you can't believe that, this is what the book says. Well, Methodists don't believe that, this is what the book says. And I found out until I met somebody, I did not know them, and I did not know their heart, and I did not know what they believed any more than you could look at the Church of Christ and say, all Church of Christ people believe this. No, they don't. And folks, it moves beyond that. Don't tell me as a preacher what I ought to get up and say about gay people if you don't know any. I can't reach their heart unless I know them. That doesn't mean I approve of anything. But now I understand something I didn't understand before. Don't tell me that you understand other folks if you don't have any of them as your friends. Don't tell me that you know how to deal or you're judging the black culture if you don't have any black friends. Go meet them. That's one of the greatest blessings God has given me in my entire life, is to deal with children that are nothing like me, teenagers that don't think like me, to force me to grow, because the iron that is sharpening iron is that kid beating on me. That's what it's required to be a friend. I want to know you, and I want to know where you're coming from, and I want to know what your experiences are, and I want to know what your life is. But then we got enemies too. Now, let me tell you something that is said in Proverbs 24 about enemies, and I think this is so important. In Proverbs 24, it says, do not gloat when your enemy falls. Now, there's a lot of wisdom in that. Don't gloat when your enemy falls, because just a quarter turn, that might have been you. Don't take joy when your enemy stumbles, is what he says. And here's why, folks. Aren't we supposed to be people of compassion? Aren't we supposed to be the people of empathy that can look in somebody's world and see a different viewpoint? What if that person, that our enemy, falls and we reach out and help them up? You see, that's our witness, that's our testimony, is I'm not going to laugh and applaud when you fall. I'm going to pick you up. And I'm going to let you see that you've been misjudging me all this time. You see, in Proverbs 25 it says, if your enemy's thirsty, what? Just let them suffer. No? That ain't in there? Okay. If your enemy's thirsty, give them a drink. If your enemy's hungry, feed them. Because you will be placing hot coals on their head. And that's the part we always get excited about. It's like, whoa, I don't have to hurt them. Man, I'm just going to do that and they're going to suffer. No. What that's saying is you give them something to drink, you give them something to eat, that's going to sear their conscience, and they're going to say, man, I must have been totally wrong about this person. And now you're going to reach out to them and maybe make a friend. So rather than the impulses of talking bad, being bad, doing bad, do good. Leave the rest up to God. Proverbs 16, talking about enemies, says this. If God approves of your walk, He'll remove your enemies. Oh, that's a promise right there, isn't it, Darrell? I don't have to worry about my enemies, do I? God's got that. I don't have to worry about people that would hurt me, or people who would do evil about me, or people that would talk bad about me, or people who would judge me. All I got to worry about is that God likes how I'm walking. And that's the promise. If God likes how you're walking, He'll move your enemies. You ain't got to sweat them. You don't have to worry about that. Well, I want to tell you a few stories today to wrap up. This first picture is a fellow here in Texas, actually. His name is Rise Bouillon. Any of y'all ever heard of Rise? Nope, most of us haven't. Right after 9/11, one of the most heinous days in American history and world history, the day when evil applauded, the day when righteousness hit its knees. But right after 9/11, there was a lot of hatred in the world. Rise is from Bangladesh. He's a Bangladeshi American. He was working in a convenience store. And a man who was so incensed by 9/11 and wanted to take it out on anybody that looked different walked into the convenience store and shot him point blank with a shotgun in the face. Rise lived. Lost eyesight in an eye. That same man killed somebody else. But after this was all said and done, Rise, not a Christian, went and fought so that that individual would not suffer the death penalty because of the rage that 9/11 had brought about. He sought forgiveness, and he did forgive the individual. He sought for a lesser sentence that the man would not suffer from being terrorized by a horrible event. That's one way to handle your enemies, huh? How about this one, this next one? This is somebody you know, Nelson Mandela. Apartheid. Apartheid was a terrible thing. In South Africa, apartheid meant that we were all separated. You had whites, you had blacks, you had coloreds, which you can guess what that is, and you had Indians. Now, the whites were in an exclusive part. The blacks, the coloreds, and the Indians were not supposed to come in certain parts of town. They could not get legal representation. The courts were set up to be against them. They had to carry documentation everywhere they went. Well, Mandela was against all of that. In 1964, thereabouts, he got called an insurrectionist. And he got sent to prison where he would remain for about 28 years, if I remember correctly. And after that time, the world put so much pressure on apartheid that apartheid ended. Mandela came out of prison, and after all these years, he was elected president of South Africa. But here's what's amazing. Rather than hate, he reached across and grabbed the hands of those who had imprisoned him. And together he determined to make a better South Africa. Could you do that after 28 years of being unjustly in horrible prisons? Well, how about this one? I don't know if you've ever heard of Anthony Ray Hinton. Most of us haven't. Anthony Ray got prosecuted about 1985. He got prosecuted for 2 murders that he did not commit. His prosecution was based on a revolver they found in his grandmama's house, and they said that was the murder weapon, even though ballistics did not match up at all. But the prosecutor and the judge both agreed, this guy just doesn't look right. He's got to be guilty. And he sat on death row. Folks, I can't imagine. That's like the doctor telling you you've got cancer and you're going to die tomorrow. 30 years he sat on death row until it was finally determined he was absolutely 100% innocent. And he came out of that prison with that smile on his face, and he said, hate never helped anybody. And he's a professional speaker that walks around talking about equal justice and right treatment of all people. One more, and you've probably seen the movie. Y'all remember old Louis Zamperini? How many of you know that story? There you go. Louis was a bombardier, and he was a prisoner of war in World War II. He was a prisoner of war to the Japanese. And he floated around to the worst places ever. And because he was an Olympian and he was a world-class miler, I mean, this is way back in the day. He ran a 4:07 mile. That's pretty quick back then. He was rather famous. They just tortured him and made it so much worse on him. If you've seen the movie Unbroken, then you've seen how he was treated. Beaten every day, doing without food, weighing next to nothing, threatened with death constantly. Watanabe was the leader of his last place where he was in a POW camp. He was called the Bird, and for some reason he just took it out on Louis every day and beat him. He would say, look at me, don't look at me, look at me, don't look at me. And every time he did it the opposite way, he'd get beaten. Well, we bombed Japan, and that prisoner of war camp, of course, was closed, and the soldiers got out. And Louis went home. absolutely hating Japanese people with every fiber of his being. And then he met Jesus. And then Louis became a preacher. And in 1950, Louis went back to Japan to form a relationship and to forgive every single guard and soldier who had beaten him and abused him, including Watanabe. The bird wouldn't show up. He couldn't do it. He couldn't face his past. But Louis, didn't matter if he came or not, he offered forgiveness to all of his enemies. But you know what the greatest act of forgiveness has ever been? Mark talked about it. It's when the Son of God, God in the flesh, absolutely innocent, guilty of nothing but unconditional love for everybody, guilty only of reaching out to be everybody's friend and to take everybody home with him, looked down at his folks that would be his enemies and said, Father, forgive. That's our standard. That is the standard by which you and I are united. It's not by color, it's not by creed, it's not by politics, it's not by wealth, it's not by any demographic. We are pulled together by the Jesus that said, forgive. We're going to have our family time, but we're going to do it a little bit different. I got to tell you a story. Surprise, surprise. This week, Melissa and I have watched a lot of movies, boy. We watch those cheesy Hallmark Christmas movies because they're all the same. They are. You don't have to guess nothing. You got a 50-year-old playing a 32-year-old, and, you know, they're all the same. Candace Cannon Bure is going to be a grandmama, still playing a 30-year-old looking for a husband. But we watch those all the time. Well, we watched one show this week that was not a Christmas movie, and honestly, it was not very well done. But when we got to the end of the movie, they played a song that I listened to and listened to and listened to. I'd never heard it before. I thought it was a brand new song by the group called Selah. Come to find out, it's a really old song. And I thought I'd sung just about everything in most of the songbooks. Never heard this one before. I want to have a little different family time. What I want to do is I want you to make sure nobody's sitting by themselves. I want somebody sitting with somebody. So if you got to get up and move, do that. Hold somebody's hand. Talk to somebody. Put your arm around somebody's shoulder. And think and reflect. I wish I could do justice to this song. Close your eyes if you need to. And just listen to the words of this. If today is a day that you want to be a Christian, Daryl's right there. I'm going to point Daryl to Bishop today. Daryl's my baptism guy. If today's the day you want to be a Christian, you walk over to Daryl or wave at Daryl. He'll take your confession today and he'll go put on those waders and he'll baptize you. Whatever you need. But now, I want you to be a friend to somebody. So if you need to move. Listen to this song.